Welcome to the behind the scenes. Oh, wise Elven King. Josh Weston, editor-in-chief of State of the Ozarks.
My crown fell off.
And the illustrious Ethan.
Yep, I'm Ethan.
Dun, 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 dun.
And there he is.
Hello, Alejandro.
Sí.
How is Alejandro?
Minus.
You're lovely.
Minus.
We love you.
Yeah, it's up for debate.
Oh, tis a good St. Patrick's themed,
Yeah.
which we haven't started. You fogged over.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't have any sunglasses to do the same thing, but I'm drinking my coffee. We're glad that you're joining us for our behind the scenes, which is shortly to not be behind the scenes as we get into this.
Yeah.
And so here we go.
All right.
Are you ready?
I am.
Oh, wise Elven King.
That crown fell off. I'm just Ethan now.
Hi, Ethan. Welcome to the State of the Ozarks podcast. This is Josh Heston, editor-in-chief.
And this is Ethan Gruboff.
And we're talking about our Ozarks.
Your community.
And this episode I've been thinking about has been brought to you by
Stafford's Barbershop and Shave Company, the place for men in downtown Branson.
Blue Rock Print Company. Upgrade your look.
Shepherd the Musical, rediscovering America's story.
And the Taney County Health Department, creating opportunities for healthy lives in our community.
Yep.
Good times.
Yeah.
Good times. I put you on the spot with that first one.
Yeah, you did. We didn't discuss who was going first.
We didn't.
Just kind of went with it.
We just jumped right into it.
Yep.
Good times.
Yeah.
Good times. So, how was your St. Patrick's Day?
It was interesting. Interesting to say the least.
Did you have to work?
Not at my day-to-day job.
Fair enough.
More like extracurricular work.
Okay.
Because, of course, St. Patrick's Day was on a Sunday.
Yes.
The Sunday
Yes,
that...
it was. Oh, I was there.
Yeah, you were there.
I was. I keep thinking that St. Patrick's Day... I celebrated St. Patrick's Day about 24 hours early.
Gotcha.
So it kind of threw me off. I kept thinking of St. Patrick's Day on the Saturday.
Yeah, no, it was Sunday.
Yeah, it was. And we were together.
Yeah.
And you were... Were you wearing green? I don't remember.
Not that time.
No, I was wearing green.
I was feeling kind of green.
But you did good.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You did really good. So
We're not even going to talk about what I did.
you did so good.
Yeah.
No, we probably should.
Yeah.
It was an illustrious moment.
Uh-huh.
Pause for coffee.
Dad was out of town preaching a revival.
Mm-hmm.
So he gave me the opportunity to fill in for him.
To fill in, yes, and fill in you did, to preach. It was not your first sermon.
No, fourth. Fifth?
But it was your longest. I've been here for
15 minutes.
It was good. It was very good. And
of course, you helped me put it together. So.
Well, we discussed. I think one of the really valuable things about this kind of thing is just getting an opportunity to bounce ideas off out loud.
Yeah.
Pretty much like we do on the podcast.
Yeah, pretty much.
We should build your next sermon on the podcast. It would be fun.
Yeah.
And of course, I don't know if there's really a disclaimer. Of course, State of the Ozarks itself is not specifically, it's independent media.
Yeah.
And it's not specifically a religious platform.
Mm-hmm.
We're very open to talking about and celebrating all sorts of different ideas and people.
Burn a freaking Christmas tree.
We did set my Christmas tree on fire.
2 years in a row.
2 years in a row. I know. I love celebrating Celtic pagan festival.
Yeah.
Of so much more fun than Groundhog's Day, and so much more fun than Valentine's Day.
Yeah, you can't burn the groundhog.
Well, in theory.
No. See your shadow now.
You're nothing but ash. Sorry, I've been watching a lot of the Blade films.
Yeah.
Blade 1, Blade 2, Blade 3.
I haven't watched any of those. So.
Oh, we can fix that.
But yeah, we have a growing list of movies that...
My recent recent post talking about don't underestimate the power of lowbrow art.
Yeah, I didn't understand that.
I was watching Blade 2 at the time. It's, I mean, granted, it's, it's not exactly Tchaikovsky. However, it's still art, and I love it. I mean, and there's like gore spattered here and there, and vampires reduced to ash, usually with a flurry of gore directly before they get reduced to burning ash. And not everything makes sense, and there was probably some issues in the cutting room and all that, but it's still fun.
Yeah.
And it's still art.
So anyway, St. Patrick's Day.
Yes. Well, and trust me, I can tie all of this straight back to St. Patrick's Day.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Western civilization was hit with the power of the first great vampire tale, Dracula, written by Bram Stoker, who was an Irishman.
Ah.
Yes. And apparently he drew his, much of him, not all. Bram Stoker did a lot Bram Stoker did a lot of really good research into a lot of different folkloric bases. And of course, we associate Dracula with that place that I'm drawing up.
Transylvania?
Thank you, Transylvania. I cannot believe it. All I wanted to say was Wallachia. For some reason, that was not helping.
That sounds like a food.
It's delicious. But but along with that, a lot of Irish folklore made its way into Bram Stoker's stories.
Yeah, because I know Dracula himself was based off of one of the former rulers of Transylvania.
Vlad the Impaler.
That's who he is.
Yep, good old Vlad.
Yeah.
Yeah, look him up on YouTube. Lots of, and coming back, tying this back into your preaching, etc., etc.
Thought the Impaler actually was
a great preacher.
Yeah, he was defending against the Muslims, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. He was, and betrayed. There's a great YouTube video on it. Betrayed by some of his own people, etc., etc. It's really, really fascinating. There's lots of just really interesting story pieces that is just fun to dig into. And, of course, if you don't want to read Dracula, which I recommend reading it, because it's really, really good, you can actually watch the, Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is a Coppola film, with, Winona Ryder, and Keanu Reeves, and Anthony Hopkins, and Gary Oldman as Dracula. Of course, not Commissioner Gordon. So now we've got a Batman tie-in. Go from there.
I'm just seeing all the Dracula turning into bats or something and flying at Keanu Reeves, and he does the Matrix thing where he
That would be, add in the Matrix and Bram Stoker.
Does that happen?
No.
Oh, it's not worth it then.
We are indeed continuing to celebrate St. Patrick's Day, the day in which the patron saint of Ireland gives all of us an opportunity to just let loose and enjoy with copious amounts of coffee.
Yes.
And other things.
Irish coffee.
Irish coffee. Love Irish coffee.
And Irish whiskey. Let's just get that out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have some of that too.
Yeah.
Actually, this is Templeton Rye from Iowa.
Oh.
It's not Irish whiskey, but it's pretty doggone good. Cheers.
And this is coffee. Anyway, St. Patrick's Day.
St. Patrick's Day. I celebrated St. Patrick's Day early. Well, you were working. I texted you.
Yeah.
I went down to the poorhouse.
Oh, yeah.
Downing Street Poorhouse, who's not a podcast partner. However, they are a State of the Ozarks member.
And they make good food.
And they make wonderful food. They had prime rib. I know. Yeah. Yeah, it was good. It was very good. It was pretty glorious, actually. I ate way too much, and let's just say I celebrated St. Patrick's Day appropriately,
Oh, yeah.
necessitating a long walk down to Vintage Paris.
Eating a lot of potatoes?
Sort of.
Yeah.
Or things made from original starches. we can
French fries.
No. Think more distilled from original starches.
Well, of course they're going to be still. They can't move on their own.
Oh, so true. So let's talk about let's talk about the editorial, shall we?
Yeah. Yeah, because it's about you being Irish.
Yes, Celtic.
Celtic, yes.
Yes, and it's
Which I always assume that Celtic means
Irish.
Irish.
But it doesn't have to.
Ah.
Yes.
Kind of like every square is a rectangle, but not every rectangle is a square.
Very good analogy. Very good analogy. I like that. Specific. So, around 700 BC, the Celts began making their way into Western Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Very large people group. Very, very large people group. And probably the dominant people group north of the Alps during the height of the Roman Empire.
Now, when you say large people group, you mean like number-wise, or were they just large?
They were just big people. Actually, they were considerably tall people.
Really?
Surprisingly tall people. Rode into war on horseback naked a lot of the time. Yeah. Freaked out the Greeks. Freaked out the Romans.
Which you'd be surprised if they freaked out Greeks, because
a lot of
you've seen their sculptures.
So true, so true. But of course the Romans referred to anyone outside of the realm of Rome, outside of the empire's Rome, as barbarians.
Yep.
And so the Celts got a reputation for being barbarians. Also, and this was a big issue. The Celts were not technically literate. They did not have a written language. They relied on their ideas, their religion, their mythology, everything. Their culture was passed down orally, with one group, the next generation, memorizing the belief systems of the previous generation.
Like the Navajo.
Yes. And as a result, when a sect or a section of the Celts were massacred by the Romans, all information about them was lost. Because there was no written records to be saved.
Yeah.
And what is very interesting, of course, much of what we know about the early Celts coming into Europe have been from unearthing burial mounds or sacrificial points of sacrifice. And a lot of the points of sacrifice, one of the big ones is Lake Neuchâtel in Switzerland. And it was apparently, we're conjecturing, but it was apparently a sacrificial lake probably to a water goddess, but we don't know that, in which treasure was given to the lake. And in the 19th century, along a drought, in the 19th century, a drought had lowered the levels of Lake Neuchâtel, and some of this became able to be found. And so this later period of Celtic art was uncovered, and it's thrillingly beautiful. And imagine basically like armor and weapons from Lord of the Rings.
Oh.
That's what you're actually, and that's what you're getting, and it's precious metals, and it's just exquisitely beautiful, and it has those beautiful curving Celtic swirls and knotwork patterns. And what is clear from, and not just this location, but other locations, an earlier find is from Hallstatt in Austria, also a seemingly bottomless lake in the Austrian Alps that was a salt mine, and consequently was a center of commerce in the ancient world, because the ancient world revolved largely around the trade of salt.
Yeah.
And these finds have shown us that the Celtic peoples at least had a unified belief system, a unified artwork, unified art form, and that they were clearly not an unthinking people. Although, and I love a quote, it's from the BBC series The Celts, that says that just because they were illiterate did not mean that they were not intellectual. And these were really, really incredibly intelligent people that Rome essentially sought to wipe out. And as they did so, the Celts were driven further and further west. And essentially what we largely understand is the Celtic peoples, they share similarities in language. They share, of course, some similarities in DNA. They share similarities in how they express themselves through art and ultimately through folklore and mythology. And there are pockets of Celtic peoples that show up on the great western fringes of the Atlantic coast of Europe. And the most dominant present-day center of that is Ireland. And so the Irish people are undoubtedly Celtic. And at the same time, Wales, the nation of Wales, was a Celtic nation. Scotland,
of course,
very Celtic. And then Cornwall, which is essentially the southwest of England, that originally had its own Celtic language, Cornish. The Welsh, the Isle of Man, which is a little rock.
Yeah, it's mostly just populated by sheep.
Well, yeah, and I love the symbol for the Isle of Man.
It's got the legs.
Yes,
yeah.
the 3 legs.
Yeah.
The 3 legs, and the translation for the motto of Isle of Man is "Whichever way you throw me, I'll stand," representing the fact that this island was a hub of not only commerce but a military hub. Whoever controlled the Isle of Man, had access. So there was a lot of turnover of ownership and pushing this way and that by a lot of whatever empire, largely Great Britain. Further confusing a lot of the Celts was you also see a Norse influence in the Celts, because the Vikings would oftentimes initially raid but then set up seaports. And then a couple of generations in, and there's of course the great story of Brian Boru conquering the barbarian Vikings and taking Ireland back for the Christians, that sort of thing. What's left out of the story is that by the time he was conquering the Vikings had largely settled down into a peaceful trading existence and had all converted to Christianity themselves. So yeah, history gets a little muddled on that.
Yeah.
Other areas that are actually Celtic include Brittany, the province of Brittany in France, which again is the in this case it's the part of France that sticks out into the Atlantic.
Yeah, I didn't even know that was there.
Yeah, it's more geography. It sticks out, and traditionally, the Bretons spoke Breton, which is also an old Celtic dialect language, and then lastly, that we know of is Galicia, which is in northwest Spain. It's a section of northwest Spain. The Galicians are, to a very large degree, Gaelic.
Yeah.
With a culture that is strongly reminiscent of what we think of as Celtic. Music, the dance. Oftentimes you see this incredibly independent spirit that easily fragments into small chiefdoms that basically says, "This is my kingdom, and screw all the rest of you." And sometimes that was really problematic because, for example, when when England began to overtake Ireland, there was no unified army to repel them. At the same time, it worked in their favor when the Vikings attempted to take over the Ireland, because, for example, if you're a band of Viking warriors and you land on the coast and you identify the closest kingdom, and you go and you make great effort to go to war against the kingdom, so on and so forth, and you finally take the kingdom, and you're victorious, and then you find out that, like, 4 miles up the road is the next kingdom. We really don't know, during the Viking era, the age of the Vikings, 900 or so, 900 or so, we don't know how many kings of Ireland there were, but we're thinking that was probably more than 80, to give you the idea of how fragmented this can be.
Wow.
And so it was impossible for relatively small forces to ever, like, take the king, take the country.
Because you walk down the road and there's another one.
There's another one, exactly. So, I think that's really interesting. Of course, there were Celtic peoples immigrating to the United States well before there was ever a United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, didn't they find remnants of Viking vessels?
Well, the Vikings certainly established a settlement in Newfoundland, in Canada.
Oh, okay.
For sure. But we know, of course, by the time that was the first colony, Jamestown,
Mm-hmm.
I think was 1610. And I don't know who all was on the roster for going there, but by this point, Great Britain had, the British people as a whole, because of the fact that the undergirding of the people were essentially of Celtic descent. That there's that.
Yeah.
But from very early on, when colonists were coming over to the original 13 colonies, a lot of those colonists were not only English or English of Celtic descent, but they were also Welsh, they were also Irish, they were also Scottish. And then as upheavals took place over the course of the next several hundred years, it would induce mass migration at various times. Certainly that happened with the Scots, it happened with the Scotch-Irish, and then the latest massive push was in the 1840s with the Irish potato famine.
Yeah.
And tens of thousands of Irish immigrated to predominantly United States, Canada, and Australia. So the Irish...
I didn't know about Australia. That's
Yep.
kind of out there.
Yeah, well, completely an aside, but Australia started as a penal colony for Great Britain.
Yeah, it was a prison, wasn't it?
Yes,
basically,
it was.
Kind of like Georgia. That's not even a joke.
Go, Georgia. The Peachtree State. And along with that, of course, the Scotch-Irish, and certainly the Welsh, making their way to the United States, oftentimes headed for the mountains. And the mountains, the Appalachian culture, and also Ozark culture, and the Southern heritage culture of the Upper South, basically the mountainous regions of the South,
mm-hmm.
have been heavily influenced by the Celts. And some of that is clearly documentable, some of that is conjecture. There's actually it's pretty much impossible to prove, but there is actually some, maybe it's tenuous, maybe it isn't. I think it would be kind of cool if it was. The very potential possibility that the haunting rebel yell of the Civil War is actually a very primal Celtic yell of battle.
Yeah, I remember reading a book that talked about it, and it was supposedly just terrifying to listen to.
Yes. I have heard some simulated recordings.
Really?
And it's very haunting.
Because it's just like, could make 100 men seem like 1,000 just from...
Yeah. And there are, whether you want to admit it or not, there are strong similarities with the way many men of the Upper South, who clearly did, these areas were clearly settled by people of Celtic ancestry into the mountains of the United States. Some strong comparisons with what other individuals of times past, even dating back to the Romans, recorded about going into battle against the Celts. They were, and I think continue to be, incredibly fierce warriors who oftentimes did not fight well as a single militaristic unit like the Roman legions.
Yeah.
But that in single hand-to-hand combat were oftentimes unsurpassed and would terrify those that they went up against. And of course, my favorite personal story is that of Queen Boudicca, whose family was killed by the Romans, and so she, as a woman and as queen of her particular Celtic tribe in England, raised her own army, and then proceeded to march on London, Londinium at the time, and burned it to the ground, and pretty much slaughtered everyone in her path, and then poisoned herself to keep, rather than die at the hands of the Romans. Ultimately, I believe that's what happened to Boudicca. So, good times.
Yeah. Meanwhile, my ancestry mostly just populated Texas.
Deep in the heart of.
Yeah. Anyway.
So we've got what did we have on the? We pretty much we're rounding up our time, but we can take a quick look. Soda bread was delicious.
You had an article on the Celtic world, which I mean,
kind of covered that.
Yeah, we just covered, and then an article on Highland Games in the hills. Irish Games in the hills.
I want to go to the Buffalo Games. They toss real buffaloes. No, they don't. Buffalo, Missouri has a Highland Games.
I think I remember hearing you talk about that once,
Yeah,
which does
probably,
not surprise me.
Probably to Bobby Mitchell. Bobby
yeah.
and I want to go, and
Yeah.
problem is it's Labor Day weekend, which is like right before Soda Fest.
Oh yeah.
And traditionally I've been a bit swamped.
Mm-hmm.
But Highland Games, I mean, it's a niche, athletic sport.
Yeah, I've done we've done some of the stuff that they do.
Yes.
And it's not exactly easy.
No, you've got the caber toss.
Oh yeah, that one's fun once you get the hang of it.
Yes, it is. We've got the hammer throw. We've got the stone put.
Is that where they pick up the big or different shaped rocks and put them up?
This one, stone put event is much like a shot put. However, the athletes instead throw a stone rather than the shot
we've
put.
done that too.
Yeah, stone weighing around 18 pounds.
We didn't do that one.
And weight for height. A 56-pound weight over a crossbar. You throw it straight up. That's intense. And the hammer throw, we talked about that, the stone put. Trying to think. Oh, and sheaf toss, not sheep toss, which would be fun, but sheaf toss. It's a big chunk. It's a burlap sack filled with several. I don't remember what the weight is, but it's heavy of straw, and then you get it on the end of your pitchfork, and you have to toss it for height.
Yeah, you told me about this one.
Yeah, I've never done it. I've watched it. Looks like fun.
Yeah.
A lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I like the Highland Games because I think that it really, of course, you wear a kilt. I love wearing my kilt. Love wearing my kilt. Should have worn my kilt down to the poorhouse, but I didn't. And at the same time, there's just that. I think if there's any one thing that expresses the Celtic soul, it is individuality. The Celts have always been and I think always will be a very individualistic people. Again, it shows in the sports, and it shows it certainly shows in battle. over several over several centuries, actually over several records of several millennium and 2 millennia, and it's a something that has echoed throughout America in terms of American history, and an American spirit is one of respect for individuality. And I believe that the Celts have strongly influenced that. The Celtic people of each generation in America have strongly influenced that as America has developed. And I think it's one of the things that it makes, it really gets my attention. And it's basically speaking up against the machine, whatever that might be. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And then there's that soda bread. So, to learn more, visit us on stateoftheozarks.net.
Sign up for the State of the Ozarks weekly email.
Like State of the Ozarks on Facebook.
Follow @Soda Media on Twitter.
Subscribe to Soda Media on YouTube.
Follow us on Instagram @State of the Ozarks.
And subscribe to this Been Thinking About podcast over on iTunes.
Yep. And thanks for listening to the Been Thinking About podcast.
With Josh.
And Ethan.
And this is our Ozarks.
Your community. Sorry, I didn't know what...
We just roll with it.
Yeah.
It's all good. We went long.
Only 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Only. Oh, thank you guys for tuning in. And we'll be back.
I forgot we were recording.
It's all good. It's all good. You get me talking about Celtic history, and I just won't shut up. Chaz. Nice hat.
I'm
I
like
like
looking as he's talking. I'm like, no wonder the course on Irish history.
Yep, it's over there.
That's why he's talking.
Uh-huh.
And then a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. See, my eyesight's not that good, so I had to...
Yeah. And those are good stories. And my favorite, The Celtic Twilight by W.B. Yeats. Yes. So good. So good. All right. Night, guys.